Hello and welcome to episode 8 of Navigating NIL. I'm Tyler Langford and I'm excited to be joined today by Reid Meyer. Reid, welcome.
Hey Tyler, how you doing?
I'm doing great, man. I appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, totally. So for those of you who don't know, Reid is a former college baseball player, spent a couple years at Texas Tech, and then found his way over to Texas as just a student and loved it. And he's now an entrepreneur who's working with Decker Sports, and he's got a company called Athletes that we're working with. So Reid, I'd love it if you could just kind of give us a little bit of a breakdown of what Athletes is, what you guys are doing to help young men and women out there.
Yeah, absolutely. So Athletes is a comprehensive, non-biased college prep program for student athletes. So we really have leaned into that college preparation, college counseling aspect of what every kid really needs when it comes to making that decision for the next step. And we've applied everything that we know to student athletes. We feel like they kind of fell off by the wayside for a little bit there. Counselors didn't really know what to do with them because they're recruiting. Coaches didn't really know how to take into consideration all the different aspects that make up a college experience. And so we're kind of here to blend those two worlds together and provide an opportunity for these kids to make a decision that benefits them academically, athletically, socially, and financially.
Totally. And that's all fantastic. And one thing that I think everyone, can agree on is college is a really formative time, right? You're spending 4 years, learning not only the academic part, but you're learning a lot about yourself. And I know for you, the process that you went through in your college, I hate to say it again, your college process was a little bit, unconventional. And I think you kind of maybe struggled with some of the things that you were just talking about. Would you mind getting into a little bit about what the process was like for you and how it ended up going?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's kind of the impetus of how Athletes was even founded. Really, was I was a kid who recruited fairly heavily out of high school. I was a tall left-handed pitcher. Was in the state of Texas, which gets quite a bit of visibility for baseball. Had the financial freedom in my family to be able to attend a lot of different showcases, play on some teams that played in some larger tournaments, and so. For me, the visibility was there in a lot of aspects, and I got to talk to a lot of schools from that way. So when I was going through the process, I made my decision for college entirely based on athletics. I looked beyond really any other thing that may have come into consideration. Had counselors that were asking me to look at different things, and I simply didn't do it, and ended up at Texas Tech University, which I will say through and through is a fantastic place to be, but it wasn't a good fit for me. Knowing where I ended up ultimately, just for me personally, it didn't have the major I was looking for. It wasn't an environment that I felt necessarily comfortable with. I came from a big city going out to West Texas. That wasn't something I was accustomed to. And my relationship to the sport, I wasn't, I may have been able to play Division I. I could compete at Division I, but that's not where I was happy. That's not where I would have enjoyed engaging with my sport. And I didn't really make that determination or realize that until I got to Texas Tech. And so I actually ended up going to 4 schools in 4 years in my college career. I was at Texas Tech for 1 year. I ended up going to a junior college very close to my home, Weatherford Junior College, for a year. Had opportunities to play at the next level and actually chose to forego those opportunities and go to the University of Texas as a full-time student. I really just burnt myself out, to be honest. I fell out of love with the game. I was making all these decisions, and there was a lot of anxiety around what I was going to do with my sport and how that was defining me and what I was going to be able to do sort of the next step in my life. And I just had to sort of step away. So took a few classes at a junior college right near UT to kind of make everything sort of connect and be able to scrounge a degree up by the end of those 4 years. And that's how you kind of get to four schools in 4 years.
There you go. And that is an impeccable journey, right? Because it's such a, it's something that a lot of athletes can relate to, because a lot of athletes end up in the portal at some point or moving schools or, decommitting and recommitting to different places. And I think a lot of that has to do with, some issues with the recruiting process combined with the admissions process, which I know is something that you guys really focus on. You mentioned it, kind of bridging the gap between a college counselor and a coach. How do you guys do that? How do you bridge that gap?
Yeah, so all of our advisors are former college athletes. I think that's kind of a starting point. As shallow as it sounds, when we're working with teenage kids, they want to know that whoever they're talking to has been where they want to go. And so I think sort of being able to bridge that gap and connect with them from the standpoint of, hey, look, you can believe what I'm telling you because I've quite literally been there and done that at some level or some fashion. I've achieved this goal that you're trying to achieve based on our conversation. So I think immediately it kind of puts those kids in a position where they can trust what we're saying and they can trust what we're doing. And that, to me, I've found is really important in this process. I think the big differentiator for us is we ground all of our work and all of our processes and curriculum in the college counseling bucket. So whereas a lot of groups will focus on recruitment and focus on placing you at these high levels or high places, or that's kind of what they'll market to folks, our principal concern is putting kids in their best fit school, wherever that is, at whatever division that is, at whatever level that is. We're not terribly concerned about what it looks like on a sheet when we say, hey, here are all the kids that committed to where they're going. We don't need to see Power Five conferences. We don't need to see Division One. If we do, that's great because it was the right fit for those kids. But what we're worried about and focused on is, what can that school do for you to set yourself up for the next 40 years rather than just the next 4 whenever you're playing your sport? Because the harsh reality of that situation is that as soon as you're done playing your sport, whether that's at the end of college or at the end of a professional career, 99 times out of 100, the next person you talk to when it comes to a job or a network or whatever doesn't care that you played that sport at all. All they care about is, can you do the job that they want you to do? Are you a good person? Do you fit this culture that we're trying to fit in whatever conversation or job that we have right here? And those are the things that we really need to focus on whenever we come to the college level. So my background is actually in college counseling. I have a certificate from the University of California, Irvine, in independent educational consulting. I've got my professional membership with IECA. I'm a certified educational planner with AICEP. So all these acronyms and whatever else that work in those spaces to really build out a program that helps these kids. Shoot, if they decide that their junior year of high school, they're working with us and we've been together for a year, they decide they don't want to play anymore, or they want to look at club level, we're still going to be able to support those kids the same way that we would if they were looking for sports all the way through the rest of their career. And that's something we're really proud of.
That's great. And I know that you guys focus on the person, right? And it's about that fit that you guys really pound on. And, I admire a lot about how, you were able to learn from your own journey and kind of turn it into something positive. So I was reading through some interviews you've done and your guys' website, and you were talking about when the idea of Athletes to Athletes was really born. And you mentioned, during your time at Texas, you were kind of realizing like, wow, if only I had all of these resources and this information sooner. So what was that process like for you, kind of fleshing out the idea of this is a company I want to start? What do you do from there?
Absolutely. So for me, to be honest, the impetus for the company started as sort of a therapeutic process for me, I guess is the best way to put it. Like you said, I was at the University of Texas. I was in my last year. I was in a 1-bedroom apartment, had no plans after college. I had kind of put on my helmet and just crashed through my degree plan to find something that fit after being at that many schools that many times. And really was just working through kind of an identity crisis for myself. I was a baseball player for so many years, and now I'm kind of in this limbo phase of who am I? What am I? What am I going to do? And I didn't really have an opportunity to think about that. And to be honest, there's a stigma around a lot of kids, in college athletics where you're shamed for thinking about it. It makes it seem like you're taking away brain space from mastering your craft. And that's something we're working really hard to break too, is that you could be a person and also be an athlete, and you need to be in these situations. And so for me, it was really going back and writing down, okay, to your point, I sat down and I said, what are the things that I wish I would have told myself? What are questions I wish I would have asked? What are things I wish I would have done during this recruiting process in high school that could have kept me from going to these 4 schools? Maybe I would have found a school that I was really excited about and stayed there for all 4 years and built that community and built that network and had a very, a much more normal college experience than I really had. And I just started writing down all these questions and all these comments and things that I wished I would have known on Post-it notes and pinning them up on my wall. And so my big running joke with all my friends is that's probably the only time my entire college career, amazingly, that I lost my security deposit, because there were just all these little pinwheels or all these little pinholes in the wall. And I'm telling you, I filled up my entire living room area with this stuff. It looked like a scene out of 23. Like I just filled it up entirely. And then when I got to the end of my sort of brain space and I had kind of really dumped everything out of what I could possibly think of, I started calling my friends. And I called folks who quit their sport. I called folks who transferred. I called folks who had great prolific careers at the same place for 4 years and said, listen, I'm trying to figure out if this is a me problem or if this is a student athlete problem. I really need to, for my own well-being, I need to know sort of where this falls on the spectrum. And it was amazing to me when I started talking to folks how it really is a student athlete problem. And those, the severity of those questions and those concerns varied by person to person, and the number of questions varied by person to person. but everyone that I talked to could resonate with a good number of things that I had on my list. And every single person that I talked to had at least a few things to add onto the list itself. And so I just built out this sort of collection of questions from these different folks that were living in that moment and experiencing these things. And from there, went to try and answer all those questions and figure out what's the best objective answer here, or what are resources that I can find that would have helped provide more context around this thing. And by the end of it, I had this 150-page booklet that I had created that really just sort of broke down all these different pieces. And so from there, it was, hey, how can we break this up into digestible pieces? How can we cut the fat and make it more digestible for kids to be able to understand? How can we implement this with different families and kids? And what started as sort of this personal project and personal passion just grew into this business. As the more people I talked to, the more folks said, yeah, shoot, I wish we would have had this, or man, we really need this. And that sort of validation of what we had created just kind of built and built over the years.
Definitely. And I want to kind of go back to, your days at Texas Tech, right? You've committed to what the best program is, even though I know you were excited about, Weatherford, where you were originally committed, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
What was the process like for you when you kind of realized, maybe this, A, I'm dealing with some mental health stuff, right? And B, maybe this is not the decision that I should have made. And then what was it like for you to kind of acknowledge that and then move forward from there?
Yeah, so my whole freshman year at Texas Tech is probably an interesting case study for some folks to look at. To your point, I was committed to Weatherford College originally, which is a junior college nearby my home. My pitching coach, who I had grown up with, was there. Felt very comfortable with that decision. And then Texas Tech comes along. Had a really good showcase in the fall of my senior year. Had actually come off of having a verbal commitment retracted from Dartmouth University, or Dartmouth College. So thought I was going to go Ivy for a little bit there. Completely had to restart my recruiting process in the fall of my senior year. And when I got there, at that point, like I said, I'm just focused on athletics. I want to go to the biggest, baddest place I can go to. So when Texas Tech comes knocking at the door and says, hey, we'll give you a scholarship and you can come hang out, I'll be honest with you, I didn't really even do any research about the school. I knew that it was Big 12. I knew they were offering me money. That's really all I needed in that decision-making process to decide where I was going to go. I didn't think about the fact that it was in West Texas. I didn't think about the fact that they didn't have a major that I was interested in taking. I thought about none of that. And so, I go there, and there's a pretty quick gut punch for me when I show up that, shoot, man, this isn't a good fit for me. I think I kind of knew it from the beginning, but my sort of 17-year-old brain, because I was an early graduate, was, hey, I'm sure everybody feels this way when they get to college. It's new. You're not really sure what's going on. You're playing Big 12 baseball. You'll get used to it. It'll be all right. And I just kind of wore that mentality of, hey, you'll get used to this. It's going to get better. I'm sure this is how everybody feels. Don't worry about it. For the better part of the fall, and was struggling more and more, but kind of using that as my anchor. And when I went to back home for winter break, my sister's actually the one who pulled me to the side and said, man, something's not right with you. Like you look skinny, you look gaunt, you look tired all the time. Like, what's going on? And I, kind of told her I was a little mentally exhausted, physically exhausted from kind of being at school, and it just wasn't really clicking and different things. And went to go talk to a therapist and found out I had, I got diagnosed with body dysmorphia and acute depression from kind of those experiences that I was having in the fall. I was struggling keeping up with folks in the locker room. Wasn't sure why 17-year-old me wasn't developing the same way that my 21-year-old teammates were developing. And so there were multiple things that I just struggled with in general. And so when the spring rolled around, there's sort of this newfound thought of, all right, I've addressed these things. I've talked about them. I've identified them. We've had the baseball season coming up. Things are going to get better. And they really just didn't. And that's not anybody's fault. That's just, I was in a scenario and I was in an environment that wasn't a fit for what I needed to be able to succeed in college. And I didn't really realize that until I was going through it. I didn't have any sort of warning signs or things to consider before getting there. And so it was sort of just this continuous kind of dip, I guess, for lack of a better term, in my mental health and my enjoyment of the sport, my enjoyment of my environment. And it was a pretty obvious decision for me when I was driving home. I was asked to not join the team for the Big 12 tournament. They could only travel with 27 out of a 35-man roster. I had pitched, I think like point 0.2 of an inning during the year. So it made sense for me not to go. So I was driving back from Lubbock, and I remember calling my folks and just saying, hey, I'm not going back to, I can't do it. I'm not going back to Lubbock. I got to do something different. And the transfer portal didn't exist at that point. So for me, the best decision was to go back to that junior college that I had originally committed to, and kind of just try to get back to center, really, and kind of find my love for the game and get myself kind of reoriented. And it was a weird time. I think I just expected baseball to outweigh every other aspect of my college decision, and I failed to process the fact that it doesn't matter how much you love your sport, and it doesn't matter how much you want to be involved in your sport. It really only constitutes for about 30% at max of your total college experience. So that other 70's got to be locked in and has to be working for you. And no amount of sport's ever going to make that change.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, mental health, especially in the athlete community, is an interesting topic just because you're there with so many competitors, right? And you mentioned it, like you're 17, you want to go to the biggest, baddest school possible. I mean, even as someone who wasn't coming out trying to play Division I sports, for me, the brand kind of mattered. And it was something I had to get past was, I'm really proud of where I go to school now, but I wasn't going to go to some massive state school, right? So I think the college process is tough for everybody. So when you're starting to sit down with an athlete and they're going through this process, which is so difficult, how do you condense your years and years of growth and experience and learning in this industry to here's what you guys need to do?
Yeah, I think, I'm really proud of the curriculum that we've built. I think it builds a really good foundation for understanding how these things work and sort of retraining these kids on how to think about college. And to your point, I think all of us at one point or another, we make our college decisions based on who we see on TV, where our parents went to school potentially, who our community cheers for, whatever it may be. And that 9 times out of 10 is either the hardest to get in school academically in your environment or the best football, basketball program in your environment. That's kind of what it gets condensed down to. And so when you're talking about, athletes especially, and you think about these athletic hierarchies that exist in these places, I think just retraining these kids on what it means to, how do you define Division I, Division II, Division III? How do you define success in your sport? What does that look like for you? What do you ideally want that to look like? And then what really do you need to succeed? There's a lot of kids that will come to me and say, my top schools, and I'm from Texas. So, my top schools are Texas, Texas A&M, TCU, SMU, Baylor. And you're like, that's great. Those are all, Power 5 or G5 Division I programs. That's awesome. I'm happy for you. We can certainly send emails and see what happens. Maybe that is the case. But for all of our kids, what we do, and again, I think some other folks that work in athletics would think it's a little odd, but we tell all of our kids, take the athletic component of what you're going to do in sports, put it into a box and stick it up in the shelf. We're not even going to talk about it for the first 3 to 6 months that we're working together, because our philosophy on that is if you really want to play college athletics, if you really care enough to play college athletics, nothing that we say or we do should be what you need to hear to have the motivation to work hard when it comes to practice and when it comes to games and when it comes to preparing yourself. We're not here to convince you that playing college athletics is the right thing to do for you. That's your job in your own brain to decide that you want to do that, because you're the only person that can motivate yourself to do that. No one is going to force you or make you be excited about a 5 a.m. to 10 p.m. schedule in school. That's just, you have to want to do that to be able to do it. So we tell them, put that part away and let's focus on all the other things that go into being a college person. Let's talk about academics. Let's talk about personal fit. Let's talk about location. Let's talk about environment. Let's talk about culture of a school. Let's talk about what you want to do when you graduate. How do you want to set yourself up? Is grad school appealing to you? Do you have aspirations to do something that involves more schooling? What career fields are intriguing? What jobs are intriguing? And just sort of start to poke and prod and expand these different parts of their brain, really just to prove to them that these things matter when it comes to making this decision, despite them being student athletes. And once we've done that and we've sort of created this baseline and this foundation for all these other things that are just as important in a college decision, then we pull that athletic piece back down and say, okay, let's figure out where we are right now today. Let's figure out where our coaches are slotting us. Let's figure out, what our group thinks that might fit. And let's create a list of schools that fit sort of that overall profile of a kid that we've now known and met and come to familiarize ourselves with. And that's from all the different aspects and all the different attributes, both on and off the field. In our school, every single college list that we give to a family is going to have Division One, Division Two, and Division Three. I don't care who you are. I don't care how good or bad you are. They're all going to have different slots because there are, if you're a kid that maybe you can only compete at the Division Three level, but you want to have a Division One experience, maybe you go play club and you go to a Division One school and you do that. Or maybe you're a kid who really, your motivation to being in college is playing a sport, but it's just not going to work at the Division One level. Well, let's explore some Division Three opportunities or some Division Two opportunities and see what makes sense there and see if we can find a fit that's going to match you, academically and otherwise. And so I think keeping that funnel really wide and really open and just teaching kids how to own that process and reaching out to coaches and getting feedback is really the important part. We really take a proactive approach to researching schools than a reactive one, which is what a lot of families find themselves doing in the recruiting process.
Yeah, definitely. And on top of all of that, the primary thing that stood out to me when I was looking into you guys was this idea of, it's athletes to athletes and it's athletes coaching athletes. But it seemed to me like the college counseling aspect of it was more valuable even than the recruiting advice you're going to get, because I mentioned at the high school that I went to had really good college counseling, and I walked in with my high and mighty, I'm going to go to one of these schools, and he was like, why, like what about those schools fit you and why you want to go there? And when I'm sitting there quiet and I don't have any way to answer it, it's like, all right, well, maybe I should be more open-minded. And I remember, one of my good friends from grade school was always, he's a D1. And it's funny because the past 2 years, he now plays football at the NAIA level. And he's always talking about how proud he is. He's like, you know what? If you can play any sport beyond the high school level that you love and you can just keep playing, go do it. And he's doing it. So it's been really impressive to see that. But I'm sure that, there's a lot that goes on that makes it hard to really get that message across to kids, where it's like, let's hold off on recruiting and let's talk about the important things. So I'm curious how NIL has impacted that. Has there been kind of an uptick in, kids thinking about NIL? Have you had to integrate that into, how you approach these conversations? How has it, impacted your guys' business?
Yeah, NIL is really interesting. I think it's, it has raised a ton of question marks with families. I think with anything, if they don't understand something, if anybody doesn't understand something, there can be a little paranoia around it. There can be a little bit of fear around it. And I think, media at all levels loves to celebrate and loves to point out, the Livy Dunns of the world and these $1 million contracts and, these outlier deals that exist in the NIL space. And everybody, it's their own right, gets to have an opinion on how this stuff works, right? And what they think about it and everything in between. I think where we have sort of taken our niche and where we have really leaned in on the NIL space with all of our families is, for us, we always take the narrative of use NIL as a way to improve what your overall career goals are. That's kind of what we talk about. NIL at its core really just allows kids to be their own spokesperson and be their own representative. And, really you're a small business owner at that point. You're representing yourself, you're representing what you can do. And that can manifest itself in many different ways. That can be hosting camps. That can be the traditional social media deals that you see and hear about in a lot of different ways. For us, we talk about, hey, if you're in a hyper-local area and you're playing a sport and you've got a community that's behind you and there's an opportunity to work in a field or in a career that you're excited about as a summer job or whatever it might be, man, if you can leverage your NIL in that space and have an opportunity to get some job experience in something you're excited about and use that to your advantage, why wouldn't you? I mean, that's really when it comes down to it. That's what a lot of folks do in business in general. I mean, I think a statistic that I saw, I think it was QuickBooks or LinkedIn or something. It was like 72% of job openings that were filled in 2022. The employer admitted to having some outside relationship with that person or some internal recommendation to that person. This is your opportunity to have that recommendation. If you can leverage this position that you're in and this thing that you've achieved to build towards a career or towards a goal that you can benefit from for the next 40 years, man, do that and give yourself that opportunity. This is the time to focus on that and to use that leverage, because we tell kids, I mean, I talked about it a little earlier, like it's sad to say, but the second you stop playing sports for that college or that school, it's amazing how many people do not care that you ever even played that sport. So while you have that leverage and you have that sort of extra tiebreaker in a lot of these scenarios, use it. I mean, use it.
Absolutely. And it's funny, I keep catching myself nodding along, right? I mean, that's everything that we talk about as an entity that's so focused on education and doing things the right way. You said it perfectly. You are your own brand. You're your own small company, right? So you have to represent yourself in a certain manner. And I always like to ask people on this podcast, what do you think people get wrong about NIL? And you hit on it. It's the sensationalized headlines. But if you look at it on a smaller level, every athlete has the chance to be their own brand, market themselves, right? Post on social media and learn how to represent themselves on social. So it's definitely an interesting and unique challenge. And one thing I noticed is that you guys have something coming soon called Sponsor an Athlete. I don't know if that's something you want to talk about, or maybe that's something we're keeping in the bag for the future, but I was just curious.
Yeah, no, a little in the bag here and there, but no, I can certainly talk about the context. Is what we're trying to do, and is make an impact wherever we possibly can. We want to do everything we can to support the next generation of student athletes, both on and off the field. And as I think we're all aware of, if you work in this space and you work in this environment, there are families in different socioeconomic situations when it comes to student athletes. There are folks that come from the private schools that have a lot of resources, and there are folks that come from inner city schools that maybe don't. And we want to do everything we can to try and create equitable resources at Athletes to Athletes for all the kids that we work with, and make it as accessible as possible for anybody who can benefit from this. And so, we're building out the framework right now for an opportunity for schools, organizations, individuals, you name it, to be able to sponsor athletes with partnered schools and partnered facilities that we're working with now, and give those kids an opportunity to sort of go through this counseling process that we have on a more one-to-one basis. And so again, it's our way of trying to sort of democratize that knowledge base and create as equitable of a resource as we possibly can. We're doing so with our app right now, the Athletes to Athletes app, free to download. We've partnered with a ton of great folks, EquiSports included, to provide either very low cost or free resources for student athletes and things that apply to them both on and off the field, whether that's testing, NIL, financial literacy. And so, that just sort of plays into the philosophy that we're trying to grow on that side as well. So really, it's our way of trying to, spread as much as we can and widen our impact at every level that we possibly can.
Yeah, no doubt. And I mean, you mentioned it. A, download the app, and B, the amount of resources and information that is even free on your guys' website is ridiculous. I was going through that pamphlet that you can download for free, and I recommend anyone to check this out. Just Google Athletes to Athletes. It'll pop right up. There was some incredible information, statistics, great advice in there for athletes. The video series that you guys do, interviewing athletes, talking to them about their experiences. A, it's a lot similar to what we do when it comes to talking about athletes and hearing from them, which is super valuable. And B, there's some really thought-provoking stories that I think are great that you guys are sharing. So I was super impressed throughout, and obviously, you using your own very unique experience to kind of springboard into this is fantastic. So the final question that I have regarding NIL is, I'm just curious how it's impacted the recruiting world. From the perspective of someone who teaches kids about recruiting and getting to college, how has it changed the way that the recruiting world works? Or has it?
Yeah, no, I think it certainly has. It's interesting. I think the NIL space, is obviously a lot more predominant at the college level right now than it is the high school level. So you hear about it more when it comes to there. But I think it plays into sort of this, and I don't want to say this is all folks by any stretch of the imagination, but I do think there's a level of kind of immediate satisfaction or expectation with some of these things. I think a lot of folks, want to see NIL as this thing that happens to you. And so they want to know what schools can do for them. They want to know what individuals can do for them. We get that question a lot, hey, how are you going to help my kid with NIL, or are you going to get us deals or whatever it might be? And I think a lot of that stems from just not understanding it fully. And so I think, trying to change the narrative with that and having it flip on, though, this is something that you have the ability to opt into and leverage and take advantage of, but it should not be looked at as something that someone is going to give you. That's going to happen again at those blue chip levels, and you're going to hear about it on ESPN because it's way more fun to talk about the $1 million deal than it is to talk about the local camp that a kid has set up because they want to, they're an entrepreneur and they want to set something up. But I think shifting the narrative there is certainly something that we're trying to focus on, that we've noticed, and that it's not something that's going to happen to you. It's something that you now have an opportunity to take advantage of. And that's kind of how we like to approach it with our families.
Right. Yeah. And it's something you go pursue. And like you said, if you can manage your brand in an advantageous way, then you can have a lot of success. So that's the last question I had for you. But we like to finish off every interview with 5 quick questions. So I'm going to run you through a gauntlet real quick. So first one up, what's the funniest, embarrassing sports story that comes to mind from your career?
Oh, man. So I had a guy that I played with at Texas Tech. Him and I were, you could have sworn we were brothers. He was 6'7", I was 6'4". That's probably the only thing you could have told about us differently. And I finally, at his wedding this last year, finally admitted that for that entire year, he was a guy who pitched quite a bit. So he was on the team quite a bit. I was a guy who didn't. Like I said, I think I registered like less than an inning in the whole season or something like that. But I used to, you get bored in the dugout, or I'd go out to the bullpen because I was bored, and I'd go warm up and whatever else when I wasn't supposed to. And anytime I ever kind of got in trouble in the dugout, I would just pretend to be him. And it happened. I got away with it way more times than I should have. And so for years, he just thought that like the coaches had it out for him for that year for some reason. And it was me just getting caught on things and just owning up to it and being like, yeah, sorry, I don't know. And so that's probably the best story that I have from my college days.
I love it. You were right, Coach. That is absolutely my fault. That's hilarious. Next up, during your athlete days, or even now, what was the go-to cheat meal?
Oh man, go-to cheat meal. I would get, okay, so there was for whatever reason, at every college campus I was on, there was an Einstein Bros Bagels. And I would get 2 cinnamon sugar Einstein Bros Bagels with plain cream cheese. And then I'd get a big old iced coffee. And for whatever reason, that was just, I'd go back to my dorm and I would crush 2 bagels and watch whatever was on Netflix that week. And that was always my like quiet time when I got to just do what I wanted to do in between practice and everything else.
I like that. It's important to be able to kind of just go back and chill for a bit. Next up, if you could choose one superpower, what would you choose?
I think my anxiety would really appreciate me being able to read people's minds. I don't think I truly like that at the end of the day, but I do think in the moment, I would like to be able to have some insight on the right things to say in the right moments. I think that's always my fear.
Right. Or even like saying something and then afterwards you're like, I didn't screw that up like I might have thought I did.
Exactly.
No, that's a good answer. That's a good answer. That would probably be mine as well. All right. So you're on a desert island and you need to survive. What 3 things are you bringing with you?
Oh my gosh. Got to think rational here.
Right. And we've had some irrational answers previously, so.
I feel like the cheat answer is like a satellite phone or something like that. But probably like a water filter probably comes in handy. Probably need a water filter. A knife, some sort of knife. Hope it doesn't get dull, I guess. Man, and then maybe storage containers, something where I can like filter out water and keep it for a while. I'll go with that. That is a super boring answer, but it's very rational.
No, that's the best answer we've gotten in terms of functionality. We've had some funny ones though. Multiple guests just bring their entire family. And then, which is, it's a cheap, but we'll let it slide. And finally, who's the greatest athlete that you ever pitched against or played any sport against, if there's other guys?
Yeah, I've got, probably. Okay. So, Noah Syndergaard, the starting pitcher he was met all different people. I played against him, and the game before we pitched against him, this was in high school. And this is where you could tell just like he was just a different human being.
Yeah.
He was a first round of playoffs right before we played him, or after, somewhere in there that season. We watched him throw a no-hitter and win the game 2-0, and he hit 2 home runs, 2 solo shot home runs. And that was the entirety of the game. He just completely took it on his back.
See, it's stuff like that reminds you that, athletes at that level are freaks. The amount of articles I'm reading this offseason about bounce back candidate Noah Syndergaard, like you throw it back to high school and every single one of those guys who are on a AAA roster or in the G League, like they were those dudes. So that's a great story.
Yeah.
Alrighty. Well, Reid, I don't want to take up any more of your time, but I really, really appreciate you coming on. You got a great story, and I'm glad you were able to tell it here for a bit.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Tyler. This was a blast.
Absolutely. All right. Thanks, everybody, for joining, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. Bye.